penser, lui donne pour gage un doux baiser. Marions-nous, soyons heureux et tu fileras si tu veux. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, non, je ne filerai pas. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, non, je ne filerai pas. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Marie-moi donc, ma petite maman, je veux me mettre en ménage. Voyez-vous pas que j'arrive à 20 ans, je pense que c'est le bon âge. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si t'as 20 ans, je suis pas mariée, je vous le dis aux mères. Je voudrais que mon fouet serait réduit en cendres et en poussière. Et que ma quenouille sur les tisons, qu'elle soit réduite en cendres et en charbon. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, non, je ne filerai pas. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Fillette rencontre son amant, lui raconte son histoire. Marions-nous maintenant que j'ai fait consentir ma mère. L'amant pour la récompenser, lui donne pour gage un doux baiser. Marions-nous, soyons heureux et tu fileras si tu veux.
We would like to begin by acknowledging our Penobscot namesake. The Penobscots have inhabited Maine and surrounding areas for over 11,000 years. Their ancestral territory included many rivers that flow into the Gulf of Maine, including all the watersheds from the Machias River in the east to Cape Ann in Massachusetts. The Penobscot Nation is one of the oldest continuously operating governments in the world. The Penobscot Nation is part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, which also includes the Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and Maliseet. Please join us in expressing our deepest respect to Penobscot leaders, past, present, and emerging, and gratitude to the Penobscot community for their enduring care and protection of the lands and waterways.
Good evening, everyone. I am Jen Shepard. I'm the Executive Director of Penobscot Theater Company located in Bangor, Maine. This is the second in a series of talkbacks or salons that we're having around our play, Je ne suis pas Evangeline. I am very honored tonight. I'm joined by two exciting guests, and I will tell you about them in a second. But I want to tell you why we did this play. We commissioned Carolyn Cook, who is the founder and artistic director of Théâtre de Rêve, a theater company out of Atlanta that is dedicated to bringing the French language and Franco American culture to the stage. She was very passionate about this play, and it ended up being a really personal play. She used Longfellow's poem Evangeline as sort of a thread that travels throughout the play. There is a fantastic review of the play in the Bangor Daily News today. Please read it and then consider getting a ticket and check it out. It will move your mind, your heart, and your soul. A word about the play. It is a play about displacement and loss of home. It's a story that explores people being displaced from their homes, and we recognize that the loss of home is not exclusive to the Acadian people and the Grand Estrangement of 1755. Today, we are focusing our conversation on where the Acadian and French people are now. And to that end, I will tell you that John Seidenberg is the person making this all look so good. And I'm also joined by Ira Kramer, who's my associate and has helped me out with these talkbacks. But the main focus tonight is our two guests. First, we have Lise Pelletier. Lise is the director of the Acadian Archives Acadians at University of Maine, Fort Kent. She's been living in the borderland between Maine and New Brunswick her entire life. She received a BA from the University of Moncton, earned an MA in French from the University of Maine, and has been lecturing about the Acadians and Franco Americans of the St. John Valley for more than 10 years. Welcome, Lise.
Bonsoir. Thank you very much.
It's so nice to have you there here. That's a little picture of the website. I was reading today, you're looking for more room. You have so much historical materials that you need more room, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So amazing. Okay. And our second guest is none other than Juliana L'Heureux. She has written and published about Franco Americans for 35 years, including in the Bangor Daily News blogs, and she is the chair of the Franco American Collection Board of Directors at the University of Southern Maine at Lewiston Auburn College. Bonsoir, Juliana.
Merci beaucoup. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'm so glad you could be here with us. So, Ira, in addition to our lovely guests, we also have suggestions of food and drink that they can try out, right? You want to tell the people about it?
Absolutely. Yes. So right now in the Facebook chat, I just dropped in the link to our event. If you go into the description of the event, there's a whole list of resources in there. There's food resources, there's some books, there's some videos, and really, most importantly, there's the food resources. A wonderful way to get to know and kind of enter a new culture is through food. And I know that some of my most rich memories as a child are come around food. And I think the same is true for a lot of us. So that's a wonderful way to kind of embark on that experience. So go to that event, check it out. And then also, if you're in the chat and you have any questions as we go through tonight, please drop some questions in there. And if we have time, we'd be more than happy to get to a couple of those. But yeah, that's all for me. Back to you, Jen.
Thanks, Ira. I always say it's like the quickest way to get into a culture, kind of to have a meal of the food that people eat, like, of course. So Lise and Juliana, where we'll start our conversation tonight is, do you have any food memories that make you feel that sense of home? Lise, do you want to start? And then we'll go to Juliana. Go ahead, Lise.
Thank you. Yes, I do. And I think the most pervasive memory I have, because it not only permeated my childhood, but it's a recipe that it is very easy to make. It's called Suis. It's a buckwheat pancake. Now, the unique thing about this buckwheat pancake is you only cook it on one side. And it's yellowish green. And as it cooks, it dries up because you're putting batter on a hot griddle. And it makes the most beautiful eyes, these little holes. And then you just layer butter in that. And then you roll them up. You roll them up, and that's how you eat them. You eat them with your fingers. And they're great as an accompaniment, but they're also great with meat pâté like creton. I grew up with that as well. Pâté chinois, which is a shepherd's pie, but also boiled dinners when all the vegetables are fresh and the big pig has been slaughtered. Sugar pies, A lot of meat pies, those are excellent. You see them also around at Christmas time. And also grilled, they're like pork rinds, but they have meat on them. So just imagine a very thick bacon. So we would have that for breakfast. Anything made with molasses as well.
Oh, that sounds good. How about you, Julia? What do you got?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to the Franco American cooks who taught me how to cook in the Franco American kitchen. And my mother-in-law was wonderful, especially with desserts. I mean, the Franco Americans have a sweet tooth, and boy, she really knew how to cook to that, particularly her blueberry cobbler, which was delicious. I agree with Lise about the use of molasses. It was almost medicinal as well as flavorful. It also went into baked beans and made them so nutritious as well as delicious and rich. So I learned how to make Boston baked beans from my sister-in-law, Lise L'Heureux, and she's the one who taught me how to soak the beans overnight. Chop the onion to put into the beans in the bean pot, chop the salt pork to put it into the bean pot, put molasses and brown sugar in there, and a little bit of salt, and stick it in the oven for up to 6 hours, and then taste it. Add more water if you need to add more water. But I was always so proud that I learned how to make real Boston baked beans in a bean pot. And I thank my husband's many excellent chefs in the family for teaching me that big skill. Of course, today we get a little lazy, I think, but every once in a while, every winter, I'll pull out the bean pot and try it one time. I tell you, it's absolutely light years away from what you might buy commercially. So, but at desserts, I think that's what stands out. All the sweetness, the various ways of molasses cake, just licking molasses off a spoon.
I feel like I just got, dinner plans and recipes for the next couple of weeks here. That's wonderful.
Right. I have to can I just give credit to the St. Agathe Historical Society? I don't know if Lise or any of you had a chance to see their video on YouTube about how to make a crepe. That is well worth watching. Excellent.
We'll have to check that out, right, Ira? We'll check that out. It reminds me a little bit, Lise, do you know lefse? It's a Norwegian bread. I have Norwegian relatives through marriage, but anyway, they have a flatbread that you put butter and sugar and roll it up. And really, that's all that it is for a kid, is just like the delivery system of sweet. Thank you for sharing that so much. We are going to show, so when we were putting this talk back together, we consulted with both Lise and Juliana, and Lise suggested that we show a clip from a documentary about the Great Upheaval, or the Grand Arrangement. So we're going to show a small clip of that, and then we'll discuss that. So John, can you roll the clip, I guess? That's what I'll say.
The Acadians, unlike almost everybody else in the world at the time, lived in a place where they could feed themselves, they could clothe themselves, where the fertility rate was extraordinary. It was even higher than Quebec's, where they had no major outbreaks of epidemics, where they had no major famine. They had not heaven on earth, but they had a human communities which were not disrupted by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You knew that there was a danger, but you didn't know how grave it was.
Families are brutally rounded up and thrown out of their homes.
And as they were rounded up and brought to the landing place, the villages were torched. And by all accounts, it was a horrific landscape of fire and ashes and runaway livestock, refugees.
The inhabitants went very unwillingly, the women carrying their children in their arms and all their goods, moving in great confusion. It appeared a scene of great woe and distress.
The worst possible situation.
Winslow records what his regiment has burned in the districts of Minas that fall.
255 houses, 276 farms, one church.
The Acadian removal is the first episode of state-sponsored ethnic cleansing in North American history.
They had left everything behind. They were living in shelters. They couldn't cultivate their land. They didn't have any cattle. So they were really, refugees.
They suffered terrible hardships. I mean, winters were very hard. They were promised provisions by the French Canadians. Those were very difficult to deliver.
Many die in the woods. But there is a growing resistance, led by a man they called Beau Soleil Broussard.
There we go. Quite a clip. Lise, can you give the audience some context for some people? I just realized as we were watching this, I was like, this is probably the first time people are really hearing about this. So do you mind educating us?
Okay, so about the event of the ethnic cleansing. So the first arrived from France and established a permanent settlement. At first, it was going to be a permanent trading post because trading had been going on with the Wabanaki for more than a century. And it was extremely prosperous. That's why France decided to establish a permanent trading post, which would then blossom into a permanent settlement. So in 1604, they tried living on St. Croix Island. They brought much of the lumber they needed to construct a small village. And the winter was disastrous. It was extremely early and very harsh. And the island did not give them much shelter from the cold. And in addition to that, they had lost much of the vegetables that they had planted. And so many died from scurvy. And so in the spring, the survivors of this expedition, there were Samuel de Champlain was part of it, this expedition. We know so much about it because he kept meticulous notes. He explains why that island was chosen. He mapped the entire Atlantic coastline. He did wonders. Anyway, after the first winter, they crossed the Bay of Fundy or the Gulf of Maine and settled in Port Royal, the place they called Port Royal, which is today Annapolis Royal. And so that was the foundation, let's say, of the colony of Acadia. So it was in Nova Scotia today. And from there, the first families arrived in the 1630s. And instead of building, cutting down the forests to build their homes and, to create lumber and all of that, instead, they harnessed the saltwater marshes. And so they dried those out and built their homes close to them so that they would have excellent arable land. And in doing so, they actually were leaving the hunting grounds and the fishing grounds of the First Nations. And so that was seen as a respectful way to treat their neighbors and allies. And they did get along very well with the French. And so the colony prospered, and the families came over starting in the 1630s, and and because they enjoyed a relatively mild seasons, the plants grew very well, and they bartered and worked with the Europeans and the Boston markets and so eventually they got to a point where historians call it the golden age of Acadia. The one thing that Acadians had wanted, now we're talking about civilians. These are farmers. They are not military people. They're not militia. They love their life. They love the idea of owning land and working that land to make it produce, and also the ability to leave land to sons or daughters. And so extremely important. And it is during this period, that the turn of let's say the 18th century, that Acadians called themselves Acadians, right? Because they recognized that their heritage was from France, but they were living a life so completely different that they needed a new name to call themselves, and they started calling themselves Acadians.
How fascinating.
Mhm.
And I want to get to and then basically the Great Upheaval.
Right. So
755
to 1764. So what happened is at the same time as the colonies are growing, the colonies in Massachusetts are growing at 30 times the rate. And so it becomes the supplies, it becomes hard to give everybody what they need. The woods aren't cut enough to fast enough to make lumber. There aren't jobs enough for everybody. The arable land is not available. And so at this point, the governor of Massachusetts and the governor of Nova Scotia started thinking, if we could only get rid of those Catholics, those French Catholics, because they're our sworn enemy, we could replace them with good British subjects and give them the lands, these rich lands. And so that was an idea that was bandied about in letters. And of course, now we have the letters that demonstrate, in fact, that what the real intention was. So in order to provide, I believe, a reason, the governor stated that Acadians had to sign an oath of allegiance to the crown. Acadians said they would, except they would not take up arms against the French, neither the British, and neither the Mi'kmaq, and they would not give up their religion. And so in 1730, Governor Phillips had them sign an oath. It was a conditional oath, and then they were called the Neutral French. However, in a subsequent government, this was not accepted. And when Acadians were faced with having to sign an unconditional oath, they refused. And that was actually the reason or the pretext to round up the Acadians. And they used the word deport, but it wasn't really deportation. Otherwise, they would have been sent back to France, or since a lot of them had been born in Acadia, they might have been sent to New France, which was also a French colony. They went to the boats. The families were separated, the men especially from the rest of the families, not knowing where those boats were going, thinking that they would all be reunited at the end of the voyage. But this was not the case. Every ship had a different destination. So the intention was quite clear. It was to separate, and as I'm quoting, to make it impossible for Acadians to recreate their culture.
Wow. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Just like sit with that, everybody. Oof. Yeah. It's been so interesting to read about this. I know, Lise, I commented to you that I listened to a podcast and you said you found all this history out when you were 36, when you went to Moncton. And Juliana, I was listening to a podcast that you had done, and I just studied up on you too. And and we were discussing right before this started about how I have had an education that French people aren't a monolith, which of course I should have known, but because of the two of you, I was sort of guided to more reading about that. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, about sort of the relationship between Franco Americans today and Acadians, and like I told you before, a friend of mine said, well, I didn't know Acadians were different from French people. And I'm like, well, they're not, but they are. They're not. So Juliana, do you want to speak to that at all?
Well, thank you. Lise is certainly the expert on the history and the cultural nuances between the groups. But I would just say, from my own experience and in my covering the Franco Americans, when I first started reporting about Franco Americans for the Portland Press Herald 30-something years ago, one of the first things that came to my attention from the readers is, well, yeah, that's just fine, but when are you going to write about the Acadians? When are you going to write about the Acadians? So that I really, picked up clearly that there was a difference. Gilles Auger, who was a Franco-American historian who lived in Sanford, he died a few years ago, but he gave me a nice orientation that was very positive. And he explained how the Acadians were an agricultural group, as Lise described. They knew how to get the most out of their land and the resources out of their land and the conservation tactics that they used, and they fed themselves, and they were just so resourceful. But when it came to Franco-Americans, they had a whole different agenda. They were industrial workers, and they tried to farm in New France, but there wasn't enough farmable land for the size families they had. They didn't have the agricultural expertise that the Acadians had developed, so they started to flood into New England for jobs and money, and they developed an industrial base. So there was two different cultures in the same state with different histories and different reasons for being there. They weren't necessarily competitive. As Lise said, at some point they even merged, and many, many families are both Acadian and Franco-American, but there was always a little bit of cultural tension there. And in my husband's family, as a matter of fact, what we found doing genealogy quite randomly, we found out that his grandmother is a Savoie. The Savoie is related to the Thibodeaux, and the Thibodeaux are Acadian.
Yes.
And it occurred to him, well, no one in his family history had ever discussed the fact that his grandmother had an Acadian history, because no one wanted to discuss it. It wasn't important to them. She was French Canadian. And so he was stunned, absolutely stunned, to find out that his grandmother had a French Canadian, had Acadian history. So, I mean, to find that kind of as a surprise, it shows that there is diversity within the culture that even the Franco-Americans are becoming aware of, as they themselves are becoming a little less parochial in their communities and learning even more about their own history and culture. So there has been that tension. But I think over the years, it certainly, the Acadians have done an absolutely wonderful job at bringing their history back together again through their every 4 years they have a major assembly, and I don't know if they're going to be able to continue that in the years of COVID, but they bring together families. We went to one that was in Madawaska and in New Brunswick and Quebec, and I just couldn't get over the joie de vivre and the camaraderie, and how the French Canadian and the Acadian families just blended and merged and had soirees and studied each other's history. So because of those family reunions, I think, and exploring their history, they're resolving some of those economic and cultural differences.
Oh, great answer. Isn't that the Congress? And I think Lise, you
Yes.
sent
Congress.
a link, and we will throw that in the chat so people can check it out. That sounded so fascinating. I know that I've been very taken, and you by the holiday of, I'm going to probably say it wrong, Tintamar.
Tintamar, perfect.
Yeah, for Tintamar.
It frequently coincides with the National Holiday of Acadian Day on August 15th. But I love this idea. Can you talk about it? Who wants to talk about this?
So I'll talk about it. So,
Okay.
so August 15th is actually National Acadian Day. It is the feast day of Our Lady of Assumption, who is the patron saint. She is the star in the flag, the Acadian flag. And so Acadians started celebrating her. And around 1955, I think it was 1955, because it was, yes, the 200th anniversary of the start of the Great 1955. And somebody said, we should have a tintamar. Tintamar means discordant noise. So the priest said, we will let the church bells ring at 6 o'clock, and everybody will march in the streets with anything that makes noise to prove to everybody that though they try to eliminate us, we are here and we are alive and thriving. And it has been adopted as an annual event wherever there are August 15th celebrations. And in addition to having this parade of anything that makes noise, pots and pans, noisemakers, those, I don't know what you call them, those flutes that you play at hockey games. People wear the colors of the Acadian flag, and they often make these huge paper mache heads that they wear on their heads. And those heads symbolize people of the local culture or people of Acadian history. Sometimes I've seen a beautiful one during that parade in 2014, and it was a frog. So yes, a French frog carrying the Acadian flag. So we call those les grosses têtes, so the big heads, because they are meant to be worn like on the shoulders, and they're something else. And you're right, there is something that happens when you are marching. So we are talking about an invisible minority in Maine and New England and throughout the United States, because we can all pass, right? We speak English, and nobody knows, if we have any French blood or not. So we are the invisible minority. And at this moment in 2014, we were walking and celebrating our identity, our history, our culture. And it was just a spiritual lifting. Just thinking about it gives me goosebumps. And I have never seen so much pride in local people's eyes. They were so happy. And it's after having been through many of difficulties and prejudices, and the KKK in Maine, having suffered through that, and having also suffered through their language being punished because they spoke French, not being allowed to speak French. And here they were celebrated for speaking French and for having this identity, and they were allowed to celebrate it. And I think it changed a lot of people. I think it brought renewed interest in their history and culture. It was a great, great thing. So there are ways that Acadians have gone a little bit ahead of, I would say, maybe Franco American organizations. And this is not a comparison. I think it was brought on by necessity. Let's say that in the province of New Brunswick, at one point, French Acadians represented 33% of the population. But in terms of linguistic rights, they did not have any. So they were a linguistic minority with huge numbers. And in 1969, the province of New Brunswick adopted the law that made the province officially bilingual and made French on the same level as English. So thereafter, children or parents who wanted their children to learn French, they would have French schools. So that law has been around for more than 50 something years, and there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
But there is an organization that deals with the political aspect of the culture, and that is representation in the legislative assemblies, economic development, schools, resources, and ensuring that the Acadian Congress continues being celebrated every 5 years. So, right, yep. So that's excellent, and I think we could learn.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to visibility, right? I mean, it's the whole idea of, we're still here. We're not a thing of the past. We're an existing culture.
Right.
And that's what it's so important for people to know. So I love the idea of just get a pot and pan and let them know.
Absolutely.
Anything to add, Juliana? I don't want to move on in case you have something you want to add.
No, I want to say I really applaud New Brunswick. I don't think that people think about how much attention the province of New Brunswick has given to preservation of the French language and culture. And people always think about Quebec. Well, yes, Quebec as well, but New Brunswick has made it province-wide. In Quebec, it's somewhat isolated to the French-speaking colony within Quebec, but there's also a large English-speaking colony. So I have to really compliment all the work that New Brunswick has done, and they are leaders. But in Maine, the two Franco Americans live in every county in Maine, but there are actually more in York County than in any other county, and York County is just absorbed them, and we don't really have an Acadian culture in York County, Maine. I can tell you that. It's pretty much called Franco American or French. So we really need more awareness like this play. I really want to compliment Carolyn Cook and the Penobscot Theater Company. I really enjoyed the play immensely, and I think if we could have a longer run of it or some public access to it, I think it would really build that awareness, help build that awareness that I think is being lost in Maine as the population ages and people aren't paying attention as much. And of course, now that the border's closed, that doesn't help efforts, but this film would, this acting, it was just terrific. So congratulations on this production.
Well, thanks. Boy, you gave me a great segue. Good. I was
well deserved.
I was going to bring up, I know I've chatted with both of you quite a bit, and I guess let's just talk about the play. We'll just talk about it, and then we can talk about Longfellow as well. I have just a few things. So I guess I was saying right before this talk started that the play is really about loss, and of course I said that at the beginning of the talk as well. And I think it's the reviewer today said about how it's like how the trauma of loss permeates one's life. And I think for me, that's what I really took away. And I cry easy. I will tell you, I am a soft touch, but I've watched that show 3 times. And at the end of it, every time I'm like weeping and I have to like collect myself, and it's so powerful. And I guess that's part of what it is that like everyone can identify with, maybe not to the same level. I'm not trying to be like, oh, I've lost, but we all have that somewhere in us, the hurt that hasn't healed, and obviously for some people. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now. What do y'all think about what I just said?
I think it's,
yeah.
Go ahead, Juliana.
No, I was going to say, Lise has lived this, so I know she's an expert on this aspect of the emotion, because they live the libre d'arrangement in the St. John Valley. It's with all the families there, every family. So go ahead, Lise.
I was going to, the production really, it really brings home how destructive to one's identity, one's family, tearing apart of a family and a community. And if I knew something about the people of the St. John Valley, Acadians, before even knowing the tragic history, I knew that family and community were first. And that is still the case. There are values, I think that we don't say enough, is that Acadians are also extremely resilient, and they believe in hope. So in spite of ethnic cleansing, in spite of having been separated, to think that some families walked up the coast of the Atlantic to make their way back to their homeland, where their piece of land or their home had been given away. And they stayed wherever they were allowed to stay. That speaks of resilience and hope, but they were also thinking of the future. They were also thinking that, okay, we have to reestablish so that we can leave something for the children. And Carolyn Cook has managed to just weave the beauty of the poem in all its inaccuracies, and the portrayal of Evangeline that, falls very short of being a true Acadian. And in fact, in spite of that, the story is rich, and she weaves that with the actual history of Acadians and her own story. And so it resonates. It should resonate with everybody. You're right. Everybody experiences a loss, whether it's a nation, and whether that loss has repercussions for centuries, because the ethnic cleansing of Acadians certainly still reverberates for us. Yeah.
Very much.
It's an amazing play. It's so well done.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear.
Absolutely.
We had a long conversation when we first talked, the very first time you and I chit-chatted, about the poem and the enduring legend, the myth, the woman, Evangeline.
Yeah.
And you told me some fascinating.
Well, first of all, my husband wanted me to remind everyone that when he grew up in Sanford, Maine, he was taught that Saint Evangeline existed. She was a saint, and there were statues of her in churches. So the culture seemed to embrace her as an iconic symbol of how much every one of the French and the French Canadians longed to sustain and protect their culture and their home. And like Lise said, it's about family, and that's what Evangeline was about. She wanted to bring back her family. She wanted her fiance. I think, she had hopes and dreams that were unfulfilled. So they all believed that they were raised to believe that she was a saint in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. Well, the interesting story, and I don't know if Lise knows Françoise Paradis. Do you know her?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Well, this story is so true, and she put it on video. She's got it on a DVD. But she is from St. Agathe, Maine, and she's a very highly educated woman. She's an educator, and and she has made it a lifelong passion to keep the spirit of Evangeline. The spirit of Evangeline alive. And she's done recordings of the Evangeline poem. She's had public read-alouds. And but the most amazing story to me was when she found out that there was a church, in a Catholic church in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where there was a statue of Saint Evangeline in the church. But the Archdiocese of Boston was about to close that church. Maybe they've even wrecked it by now. It might not even be there. But at that point, they were going to close it and everything in there had to get out. Well, at the 11th hour, Francois calls the Archdiocese office in Boston and says, hold everything. You have a statue of Evangeline in that church? And they said, well, yeah, it's about 2,000 pounds of this statue. She says, I want it. They said, dear lady, if you want it, you can have it, but you got to get it out of there. And God love her. She did. She was so passionate about protecting that statue because it was part of her heritage and culture, and she wanted it protected for other people. And it is a stunning statue. She did. She funded the whole operation. She got that 2,000-pound statue out of that church. She hired a moving truck. That moving truck pulled that statue up to the Acadian village in Van Buren, where it is standing now in the middle of the museum, which is sort of an outdoor-indoor. They have this fabulous array of Acadian houses that have been protected and preserved. So there she is, Saint Evangeline, right in the middle. And Francois paid to have it installed there. And boy, is she majestic. But I think that's a real symbol to the French Acadians that Evangeline may not have really existed, but she's a myth that has really become real to them. So I would encourage everyone, if you ever get up to Van Buren, be sure and check out the Acadian Museum there, and you'll see St. Evangeline right in the center. She's gorgeous.
I think you said something right there at the top that something about your husband was taught that she was a symbol of hope, or a symbol of the hope for the family. And I guess that's kind of what I'm.
Yeah, well, they had so few heroes and heroines. It was an oppressed. They grew up thinking that they were not smart, that they and they did not have their own like American patriots. Like, even though Paul Revere was a French Huguenot, they didn't have their own patriots that they could point to. Samuel de Champlain, everyone. So it was an English culture, but Evangeline was written by a Protestant. I mean, a Protestant Englishman, and so he was able to bring this character alive, not really knowing anything much about the culture. I just think it was incredibly brilliant of him to be able to conceptualize how much Evangeline longed for, what all Franco Americans and Acadians desperately longed for: family and unity and peace and faith.
Yeah, I guess that's what I mean, is like, we all need symbols. Like, we all. Right. That's what gets us through, right? You hold on to those things. It's what creates a sense of hope and aspiration in you. That's what she is. That's what she represents. I mean, is that fair to say, I think? And I think that's what makes it so powerful. The play is resonant because of Carolyn's words, but also here's Longfellow reaching back to us again. Here's Evangeline reaching back to us, to pull us forward, I think.
I totally agree, and I firmly believe that Evangeline will forever make him almost immortal as a poet, even though people found him to be very popular for his his folk poems. But Evangeline is a work. I know that there are inaccuracies, but he created an icon that is pretty immortal, really.
Yeah, seems like it. Let me see if there's any. I guess we'll have closing thoughts. Kind of, we're ready to wrap it up. This has been so great. Thank you so much to both of you. What a wonderful conversation. I think one thing I was going to bring up that let's see. I'm looking at my notes, y'all. I guess I'll just bring up that. Let's see. I guess what I would just want to close with was that I guess I'm so impressed and amazed that the Acadians were able to hold on to their culture through all of this and bring it back, and so Can you give a word? There was a quote you had, Lise, and I know this is about when the border was created. We didn't cross the border crossed us. And I thought even through all of that, because that was another sort of fresh wound, was the making of the Canadian border, which is just
That's right.
a map. It's not a real thing. People made it, not nature.
Mm.
So what is the way forward, I guess? What is your hope for the Acadian and the Franco American culture in Maine? What do you want for the future?
Well, this region is particular because that's right. The region was founded by one people, settled on both sides of the St. John River. It was one whole, and a long time ago, I heard a very old person say it was the third deportation.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first one attacked the entire nation. The second was when Lloyd came in 1783, and that group of Acadians moved to the Madawaska territory. And then in 1842, the land that they had claimed on both sides of the river, now it separated them, and it also separated them into two nations with different political systems, school systems, languages. Of course, for a long, long time, the border was only alive in administrators' minds. I remember my grandmother from St. Francis. She says, "Oh, if you wanted something, you hopped in a boat and you went across." So across, or the other side, was the other side of the whole. This side in Canada and this side in the US, but really it's a whole. And so I grew up with that, and I believe that. And until the late 1990s, it was actually very much like that in effect. Then, of course, 9/11, and then future, in addition to all of that, there was a militarization of the border with, combat boots, arms and guns, assault rifles, very, very visible, attitudes. People who you would see like the year before, and they say, "Hey, what you doing now?" And "How's it going? How's your dad?" And now they would, they take off your glasses, please, so I can look in your eyes. I need to check your passport. And yeah, it is just, it doesn't have to be that way. I believe that there is, in a way, it is an institution, right? It was not meant to keep people out.
Right.
It was meant as a control of merchandise, and it was meant to protect the economy of each country. And now it's not merchandise. It's the scrutiny is on the people. And it's really sad, because quite a few people have decided they don't want to cross into Canada because they don't want to come back through the American ports.
Oh, wow.
And, we all have family on both sides.
Yeah.
I am hopeful that we will get beyond this, and we will continue to have numerous occasions to connect with our families and community on the other side of the great St. John River, because that, I think, would give permanence to our language and would help stop the erosion of the language. And we'd have more people to celebrate our culture and our language.
That's exactly right. Juliana, do you have anything you'd like to add? Hopes for the future?
Well, as the chair of the Franco American collection in Lewiston at the Lewiston Auburn College, I want to tell you that we have been so impressed with what I consider to be a real growth and interest in in maintaining the cultural outreach to the community there and beyond. And actually, there's been a real resurgence of interest in the language, and I do think that's been supported by the French government. It's really actually helped us to develop programs that will bring more French to children. We're actually going to do a Christmas book read on YouTube. The collection is this December. Well, we're going to broadcast it this December on YouTube or on the USM channel. Anyway, we're going to have it online. Yeah. And we're going to have children's books read in French and English. So I really do see an interest in the language because there's been a lot more interest in learning more than one language. And there's been a lot of support for that. So I do have hope as well, and I share Lisa's hope, but I do think that we have to open the borders with Canada. These are real families that are completely separated, even for funerals. They're not unable to connect, and weddings. Your families can't attend, and this is just really difficult for both families on both sides of the border. So I really think that will help to bring a resurgence of interest in supporting the culture, because the more we're isolated, the more parochial we become, and it's not going to be good. But I think that the resurgence of the languages, it's very hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to see a new interest.
Yeah, I love that. I want to throw it back to a quote that I said during the last talk back. We had Georges Budago-Mokoko, Angela Okafor, and Nathalie Gori. And I read a quote that she said that, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Okay. So she said, basically, when you learn a language of another culture, you're not just learning the language. You learn about their art, you learn about their politics, you learn about their commerce. And it's through that language that you begin to open your mind to the world. And in doing so, I mean, it's the whole thing, like education eradicates ignorance, which hopefully eradicates hate. So I have the same hopes. Thank you so much, Lise Pelletier, Director of the Acadian Archives, and Juliana L'Heureux, main writer about the Franco American community. Thank you for chatting.
Okay. Yay.
Hang on the line. I'm just going to say goodbye to our audience, and then I'll come back and talk to the two of you. So everyone, if you want to see I Am Not Evangeline, you can go to our website, penobscottheater.org, and get tickets, or you can call 207-942-3333 and check out the Facebook chat. There's so many links in there, so many great things. And I'll tell you what, get out and visit these places. Go to the village of, I gotta look up my notes.
The Acadian Village.
Yeah, and see that statue, and go visit the Acadian Archives, because you can see all that history. And it's not just history, it's like now too. It's so exciting. All right, everyone, I'm Jen Shepard. I'll see you next week. Bye.
Marie-moi donc, ma petite maman, je veux me mettre en ménage. Voyez-vous pas que j'arrive à 20 ans, je pense que c'est le bon âge. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si t'as 20 ans, je suis pas mariée, je vous le dis aux mères. Je voudrais que mon foie serait réduit en cendres et en poussière. Et que ma quenouille sur les tisons, qu'elle soit réduite en cendres et en charbon. Toujours tourner, toujours